Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 64. This chapter is titled, Become the Samurai. And I always sort of joke on Kagurabachi, sort of beat down a little bit, because I love this series. I would not be talking about this series on a weekly basis if I did not absolutely love sitting down, love the characters that, of course, Chihiro Hokuzono, the author, has perfectly crafted, in my opinion. Well, I won't say perfectly crafted. Of course, there's always flaws with every single series, mainly Row, but is what it is there. But either way, this chapter title of Become the Samurai, whenever I first read this chapter title and even getting ready for this video, just going through of I don't know if this is just weird or something I do, of course, I don't know how many of other you watching this also do YouTube or any of that sort of thing, but I always have my set start to video hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in day, talk about insert series name here, chapter number, whatever it is, or episode number, whatever it is, if I'm talking about an anime. This chapter or episode is titled, Become whatever. And just saying this for I always use the bathroom for my videos too, just make sure I don't have to pee halfway through, and just saying hey, become the samurai. It just invokes that raw emotion. And of course, as you'll be getting into, it is a very cool moment where Chihiro indeed does become the samurai in this chapter. So Kagurabachi, I always make fun of you for having lazy chapter titles. It's something I feel like Oshinoko, which was the other series that I previously talked about every single week here on this channel. And granted, these series did run along at each other for a little while before, of course, Oshinoko ended, which, hey, if you ever want to hear my thoughts on any Oshinoko chapters, I still have all of those videos up on the channel that you guys can go watch because, hey, Oshinoko's not going anywhere. I think we're getting season 3 information here soon, so either way, Oshinoko always did something where they had very, good chapter titles, in my opinion, where Kagurabachi has definitely been sort of lackluster in a few of these things, but Become the Samurai feels like that evoking of emotion of, hey, become the samurai, as you'll be getting into. Really, really cool moment. But, yeah, before we sort of just hop into this chapter in general, of course, really fun chapter. Of course, we need to talk about what happened last time in Kagurabachi. And last time we had this whole thing where Chihiro and the Masumi were all sort of working together. And the whole idea of last chapter is that the Masumi have taken a load off of Chihiro, letting Chihiro be more of this person who doesn't have to worry about saving everybody else. Because, of course, as we saw last chapter, Ro and Moku and Sumi are also in charge of helping everybody else, right? Of course, our current situation is Chihiro, Kugiri, Sumi, and Iori are all sort of on a highway, with Sumi and Iori on a motorcycle together, and Chihiro just grabbed the blade that sort of jettisoned up out of Sumi's motorcycle into his hand so he could go and start to fight with Kugiri, right? And that is pretty much where we start off this chapter in a way. Of course, last chapter I had a bit more where Iori's oh my gosh, what's going on here? Kugiri cuts her an entire bus, almost quartered it into pieces in a really cool image. But that is sort of where we leave off last chapter of Kagurabachi. And we start off in a very similar position as we see that Chihiro is now here on the highway with Kugiri in front of him. Their swords sort of are taken off of each other and just standing there getting ready to clash again. And Sumi, who's of course on the motorcycle, just hey Chihiro, your sheath, as she sort of takes the sheath off of where it was attacked, the axle of the motorcycle before, and throws it back over to Chihiro, who catches it in the air, just says hey, thank you, Sumi. As we then see that Iori gets a very good look at Chihiro looking at this person who she also saw a few chapters ago attacking the Kabuki play, right? And this very interesting thing of, okay, how is she going to be coming to terms with this? Is this is the person that Chihiro actually is. But this pretty much is the final part that we really see of Iori for the chapter, as we will sort of cut back to her and Sumi at the very end of the chapter, but the majority of this chapter is focused on Chihiro and Kugiri for sure. Right, well, Chihiro thanks, of course, Sumi for hey, thank you for the sheath, as we see that Kugiri just says hey, I want to have a proper sword fight, right? He says hey, but continuing with incredibly dynamic swordsmen is also problematic. I just want to blow off some steam, but I also have a job to do. I need to capture that girl. As he sort of like just says all of this, and he also thinks that whole idea of like, hey, a sword fight is a conversation, one of Kugiri's main things that he's been known for in the series so far. And as he gets ready to sort of like cut Chihiro down to get through to get to Iori, who is on, of course, Sumi's motorbike, Chihiro, of course, hops it away, grabs his sword, and just like parries it in this moment. We get like the whole shing sound effect as it's like shing, shing, shing. Really, really sort of fun thing here. As Chihiro just thinks like, hey, okay, 3 years ago, I didn't see this guy or the other member of the Hishaku in the attack on my father. Like, hey, the Hishaku, as we also think to Samura's whole thing whenever he cut down Chihiro, killing him a few chapters ago, like, hey, revenge, I'll handle that, you put down your sword. And Chihiro just thinks like, hey, at that moment, my entitlement to revenge was stripped away. As we do another cafe flashback scene where we see that Chihiro is sitting there with the Masumi and just is like, hey, like you said, Chihiro, we want to solve as much of this problem as we can before Hakuri gets on his feet. And Ro's like, yeah, I mean, that's right. And Chihiro just is like, hey, then there's one thing that we should address immediately. I am weak. As Chihiro just thinks to Hakuri being like, hey, all this time he saved me by sacrificing himself. I let him carry my burden. And Chihiro's like in the present like, hey, my weakness led Hakuri to this state. Sitting here at the cafe, we see that a little bit of a funny scene where Moku is spoon feeding Chihiro and Ro is like, hey, you're sort of overstating it in that way, right? And Chihiro just is like, hey, either way, if I'm getting ready to rejoin the fight, like, I can't do it as I am now. When I faced off with Mr. Samura, like, sure, I was intimidated, but there's also a huge gap in our just tactical abilities. Like, hey, I'm just simply not as skilled with the sword as he is, right? Also, thinking to Iruha, who he's also not as skilled as Iruha was in any of these moments either, right? It's just like, hey, the physical fortification, it serves as a platform for sorcery. A person can gain superhuman agility and endurance circulating spirit energy in the body. As we understand, this is how fighters like Azame do close quarter combat by easily just going through and circulating all of this sorcery through their body, and it sort of like enhances them. So really like Chakra and Naruto, from what I remember. Granted, I don't particularly like Naruto. I've never been a fan of it, so I don't particularly understand that reference, but from what I remember from like the initial arc, that is how Chakra works. And he says like, hey, and swordsmanship is an extension of that. Like, skillfully circulating spirit energy to the sword generates very, very powerful swordsmanship. As we see this whole idea of a boulder standing in front of a swordsman, the swordsman sort of channeling their aura into their blade in this moment, and then their blade has this added power, which also then lets them cut through, in this case, a boulder, right? And Chihiro just continues like, hey, the Enchanted Blade warriors in the Seitei War were master swordsmen who had made a name for themselves before the war. As Chihiro's like, hey, I've been using my Enchanted Blade for longer than them, but it's obvious that they have a deeper mastery of the Enchanted Blades, which is a very interesting concept to be brought up here, because of course Chihiro picked up the Inten Enchanted Blade just over 3 years ago whenever his father was killed in the whole attack on the Kunishige fortress and all of that sort of thing. I guess Kunishige's own Sanso location before that was really such a thing. But all of the Enchanted Blade wielders only really held their blade for 1 to 2 years at most, which also gives us a timeline for how long the Seitei War actually took. Because we've never known how long this conflict actually lasted. Of course, we've known sort of the details, and it happened 18 years ago in all of this situation, but we've never truly understood how long the conflict is going on for. Like, as far as I knew, I thought this was a war that was going on for like 5 or 10 years, and then Kunishige rocked up and said, hey, here are the blades. And that's honestly a lot of how it could go, and it was just in those 1 to 2 years where this war fully wrapped up, and that is why the Enchanted Blade users have only had their blades for that long, right? But Chihiro just continues here on to present, like, hey, nobody's ever taught me proper swordplay, as of course, like, we look to Shiba, who is Chihiro's main mentor, being like, hey, bro, I don't know how to use a sword, like, I'm a close combat fighter, I've got my, teleportation sorcery, that's what I'm proficient proficient in. A sword? No way, Jose, pretty much, right? And Chihiro also says, like, hey, my compatibility with Inten is absolutely perfect. In which case, Ro then speaks up just saying, like, hey, in which case, you need to hone your swordsmanship to achieve greater heights with the Enchanted Blade, right? And Chihiro in this moment just thinks, like, hey, fully in the present, on the highway, he's just thinking, like, hey, I've been relying on the Enchanted Blade's abilities, but that won't cut it under the current circumstances. Of course, we get to look at the owl Enchanted Blade detector currently looming over in the skies. He just thinks, like, hey, like it or not, swordsmanship is going to be put to the test. As we then see Ro is also looking at this whole thing, and he sort of just thinks, like, hey, like it or not, Chihiro, your swordsmanship is getting ready to be put to the test. We will do everything possible to cover you, but now, this will be the first battle in which you don't use the Enchanted Blade, Chihiro. As we get to chapter title, chapter 4, or chapter 64, Become the Samurai, right? Kugiri and Chihiro are currently, like, clashing your Enchanted Blades, and Kugiri's like, hey, don't distract me, Chihiro, like, I won't be able to focus on my work. My thirst for swordsmanship is too great, pretty much, right? And as all this happens, Kugiri's, like, parrying all of Chihiro's strikes back and forth. Chihiro's, like, a little interested by what Kugiri is saying, and in this moment, we sort of see, like, they parry back and forth, and it really looks like Chihiro is really outclassed as far when it comes to battling with Kugiri, right? And Chihiro's sort of thinking, like, damn it, like, each attack is so incredibly fast, and it's also just powerful, right? And we even see that Ro has a little bit of impact on this, thoughts on this also, being like, hey, he hasn't used his sorcery yet. Has this all just been the sword techniques infused with spirit energy that Chihiro's talking about earlier? I mean, I guess you could say he's a really good example, but it's just a coincidence, but it's also inappropriate for Chihiro's first true battle. This insane level of mastery. As Kugiri's just like, hey, what is all this garbage, right? And he's like, hey, who taught you how to fight with swords, Chihiro, right? And Chihiro's like, oh, nobody actually has. And Kugiri's like, right, your lines of attack are all out of whack with your spirit energy. And he's like, hey, aren't you a sword fighter? What have you been doing this entire time? Your swords play is... And Chihiro's just like, hey, I'll learn it all here. And Kugiri's just like, here? Like, are you serious? Like, you think you can refine your skills by exposing yourself in an actual battle? Like, hey, don't make me laugh. As we get a little bit of a flashback in Kugiri's mind of whenever Yura, of course, the leader of the Hishaku, came up to Kugiri and just said, like, hey, Kugiri, I want you to educate Hirohiko in the art of the sword. And Kugiri's like, yeah, of course, leave it to me. And he goes to Hirohiko's room and just says, like, okay, this isn't like martial arts wherever you just, like, circulate spirit energy within your body. You have to imbue your katana with it and pretty much make it an extension of your body in a way. Like, hey, you must also glean deeper wisdom of those who came before you to truly unlock all of your abilities, right? And Hirohiko just is like, hey, Kugiri, like, you gotta figure it out. Like, hey, I'm good. I'll figure all this out on my own later. Like, I don't need, like, hey, I'm an intuitive learner. And Kugiri, remembering this as he's sort of clashing blades with Chihiro, just says, like, hey, don't be arrogant. If you can't respect a sword, don't use it at all. Of course, these seems like some words that he wanted to say to Hirohiko back then, but just despite all the circumstances, it's something that's sort of getting, like, pin-up anger that's sort of unleashing now in the moment, right? Chihiro just thinks, like, okay, what in the world is all of this, right? And Kugiri just thinks, like, hey, how can I wage a decent sword fight with a moron who disrespects the art? And he's like, impossible. As he parries Chihiro's blade away one more time and starts to chase after Iori and Sumi on the motorbike, pretty much, right? And Kugiri's just like, damn it, like, I've had it with all of you, pretty much, right? Chihiro's sort of stuck in the background, and Ro's like, hey, Chihiro, don't worry, we'll stop him. Like, hey, what is his deal? He seems, like, really crazy all of a sudden, right? And Kugiri is approaching the motorbike, and he's just like, a goblin. Like, right now, I have to focus on my job. As Chihiro, holding this blade in his hand, just sort of comes to terms like, damn it, there's too much distance. Like, right now, I'm paying the price of relying totally on the enchanted blade this entire time. And he's just saying, like, damn it, like, he's right. I can't expect to master it overnight. As what he does is he just takes his blade and sheaves it back up. And Ro looks behind him as, of course, him and Moku are chasing after Kugiri and says, like, huh, what, Chihiro, like, wait, what are you doing? As we get a little bit of narration in the Kagurabachi universe, as this narration just goes, his technique is rough, but over 3 years of battle, Chihiro has honed his talent and built a physical foundation. The only thing he lacks is a proper role model. As the narration just continues like, hey, unlike Kugiri, he does not have the skill yet to dramatically circulate spirit energy, so he's restricted into pouring it into kata. And we just see like, hey, a role model, he learned organically. As we see the images of Samura in this moment, as we also cut back to a long time ago, whenever the whole idea where Hakuri sort of got introduced and said like, hey, I need a samurai in my life. And Chihiro in the present just says, okay, I'll become that samurai. As he grips a hand on the top of the enchanted blade, and he just thinks to achieve greater heights. As all of a sudden, Ro looks back like, hey, wait, that's Samura's. As we just see that Chihiro uses the EI white purity style in this moment. And we get a little bit of a flashback to what I almost forgot his name, Aruha, whenever he was still alive, just sort of explaining all of this on the train that long ago, just saying like, hey, EI White Purity Style, the technique entails building up spirit energy and containing it in the scabbard. Then the energy releases explosively whenever you draw the sword, accumulating in extreme speed. As we see in this moment, Chihiro's going, he sheathed up the blade, and as he starts to unsheathe it, a bunch of energy almost seems to flash out of it, as we see that Chihiro almost gains a super speed for a second as he chases after Kugiri and just strikes him with the sword. But of course, Kugiri is a master swordsman. He realizes this and parries the shot in this moment, right? And all of a sudden, we just see that Kugiri's like, oh, wait a second. He just used the EI White Purity style. Like, hey, that EI is still so immature, but even so, that's it. And he's like, hey, even still, if it's just an imitation, he tried to put it into the kata. Like, he took what I yelled at him to heart. As he sort of looks back to the motorcycle where now Sumi and Iori are truly getting away. And he's like, no, I have work to do. I cannot fight the blade like this. And he's like, okay, here's the thing. I left my partner in the car earlier. As we see the turned over car where the other, his female duo Hishaku member is. And we see that she's still alive. And she sort of just has like a word bubble with nothing in it. But she's just like passed out laying on the ground in the car in this moment, right? And Kugiri just thinks like, hey, it's my duty to capture that girl. As he thinks back to his conversation with Hirohiko, like, hey, he's like, hey, Hirohiko, the art of swordsmanship is, and Hirohiko's like, hey, Kugiri, you just take things too seriously. Just watch me and just see how cool I really am. And then Yura just saying like, hey, if that's how you feel, Hirohiko, just do as you please. And like, Kugiri, you're good for your job here, right? As Kugiri just turns around and from looking where Sumi and Iori are on the motorbike, just looks at Chihiro and just sees Chihiro's eyes in this moment. And we get a look into Kugiri's mind where we just see pretty much like everything's pretty much just getting wiped in this second. Like, hey, all of like the regular things for happening in the mind, like hunger, duty, sex, money, sleep, and kinship, like all of these things that he's got like written around his mind. In the middle of his mind is a thirst for sword fighting. As all of a sudden, we just see like this sort of resonates all of a sudden with Kugiri. And he's like, I can't hold back anymore. As we see that he's getting ready to go out all out and just sword fight with Chihiro. As we see that Sumi and Iori get away, as Sumi just says like, hey, well, I guess he lost the struggle, and Iori is at a very big loss for words at sort of realizing this, as we see that Sumi and Iori drive away, as Chihiro and Kugiri are fully getting ready to hop into their sword fight. And that is where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi. Oh, this was just a really fun chapter through and through. Like I said, the whole moment gets built up, and I know it's a little hard whenever I sit down here and I try to describe what happens in this chapter to the best of my ability, and it's honestly one of these things where this image works a lot better in the movement visual that reading manga is, as like we get this whole thing of like Chihiro learning about the EI White Purity style, and he just goes through, and then he uses it, and as a first attempt, it works pretty well as he attains this speed that, of course, we've seen Samura and Aruha use in the past, as he just goes, chases after, and strikes swords with Kugiri. And then we have this very interesting thing of, okay, the other Hishaku member is still alive in this moment. Is she going to have more relevance here? Or is she going to have to come and save Kugiri whenever Kugiri looks like he is very much not doing very well, right? As we pretty much just see, like, okay, Kugiri has this whole thing where he loves sword fighting way too much, so he's sort of like delving too deeply in it whenever Chihiro shows him like too much of a good time, pretty much, which is also part of his fault, which is also leading to Sumi and Iori getting away. But I think this very much makes sense, and I'll be happy to see how this fight sort of ensues in the next few chapters. But really, really fun as Kugiri's just like, he has this like brain explosion almost, and just like, oh, he's like, I can't hold back anymore. It's just a really fun moment as Iori, of course, who does not know anything going on, they are getting away. As far as predictions for next chapter, I can totally see where we sort of just cut away from this battle between Chihiro and Kugiri. Granted, I think we're going to be getting a little bit more of it, but I can also see a world in which we cut away to like, all of the Masumi just helping get Iori out and away from here, and then maybe the female Hishaku member confronts them, and the Masumi have to deal with that while also protecting Iori, while Chihiro is probably holding off against the bigger threat of Kugiri in this moment. But also we know that Kugiri has Subaru's enchanted blade also, so I could also, are we going to cut to like Subaru, and Subaru has like a heart attack? Oh no, he can no longer use the enchanted blade, and then Kugiri's able to use it. We just really don't have the best of ideas here in this moment, but either way, really fun chapter of Kagurabachi, and yeah, we just see Chihiro become the samurai that Hakuri always wanted him to become. It's a really, really fun thing, and hey, I know all the shippers out there love it, but like, hey, I don't see any reason why Chihiro x Haruki wouldn't be a thing. Like, hey, they're just perfect for each other, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, with that, thank you guys so much for watching this video on Kagurabachi. Again, this is chapter number 64 of the series. I have plenty of other videos on my channel about Kagurabachi. I think last time I checked, which was before the last video got posted, was 20 reviews, so I've got like 22 reviews, including this one, or 21 with not including this one. That's like basic math everybody should be able to do. But I've got all of those on the channel. There will not only be a playlist list in the description box down below, but also as an end card on this video. And if you don't feel like clicking on any of those, well, just click on my channel and just check out everything there. I cover plenty of other anime and manga related content. I'm actually, when I'm recording this Kagurabachi chapter review, the next chapter of Kagurabachi actually hasn't come out yet, so I'm actually caught up on Kagurabachi fronts, which is a really, really awesome thing. Granted, this video will be coming out after the next chapter has already debuted, but hey, it is what it is, not really that too big of a deal. Man, thank you guys so much for watching. Great chapter of Kagurabachi, and I'll catch you guys next time for Kagurabachi, chapter number 65. Again, this was chapter number 64, titled Become the Samurai, and you know what? This sort of wants me to go out of my college dorm, go to like some Comic-Con, pick up a sword, and like just go outside and like just swing it back and forth. Act like really cool. Think I'm like Chihiro, got some goldfish floating around me. I don't know if that's just my delusions or whatever, but yeah, either way. Thank you all of you Bachi Bros for watching, and I will catch you guys next time. This has been Glowplasma 231, signing out.